1980, 19-year-old Robert Shafran began studying at a college in New York State. To the boy's great surprise, on the very first day a huge number of guys said hello to him, and girls were literally hanging on his neck. Except everyone called him Eddie. Not a bad start for some mystery movie, right? But it all really happened. The situation was clarified when Robert talked to his roommate Michael Domitz. It turns out that Eddie Galland, who looks just like Robert, used to live with him. Eddie transferred to another educational institution, but when they saw Robert, everybody thought that he came back here, because everything was the same in appearance. The figure, the haircut, the way to talk. Dominitz found out that both guys were born on July 12, 1961, and they were twins, but they were adopted by different families. Robert and Eddie met. The story caused an extreme media backlash. But later it turned out that the brothers' happy reunion was not the end of it at all. After seeing the two brothers, another guy named David Coleman called them. He reported that he looked exactly like them. Only then did the adoption agency tell them that there was also a fourth boy who left shortly after he was born. The other children were given to different families. It turned out that Robert was born first, then David and Eddie, 27 minutes apart each. The story of the brothers became the basis for the documentary Three Identical Strangers. The boys were often invited to television, and they enjoyed basking in the glow of fame. The brothers' good reputation was shaken when it turned out that Robert had recently been convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The 83-year-old victim had been bludgeoned during a robbery. The court ruled that the boy had had little or no part in the case, and sentenced him to 5 years of community service in an orphanage. The foster parents began to find out why the agency had not warned them that their children had been born twins. In addition, the fact that each of the foster families had a daughter who was 2 years older than the boys seemed odd. At first the workers claimed that it was just a coincidence. Eventually, with the help of journalists, they managed to get to the bottom of the truth. It turned out that these boys were part of a social experiment to study the influence of genes and environment. Dr. Peter Neubauer led the study. The adoptive families were told that their children were taking part in an experiment to study child development. So Eddie, Robert, and David's new parents regularly brought the boys to the hospital, where they underwent various tests for intelligence, development, and other things. But no one knew that within a 100-mile radius each of the boys had twin siblings. The children were intentionally placed in families with different incomes and positions in society. In this case, years later it turned out that the boys smoke the same cigarettes, enjoy the same food, and their habits are very similar. Other children also took part in the experiment, but the results were never published because of extremely negative reactions. Interestingly, Dr. Neubauer in 2008 thought he was doing the right thing. As for the fate of the reunited twins, at first all three transferred to the same department and opened a common restaurant, which in the first year was very popular. Later, differences of opinion began to develop between the boys. Robert became disillusioned and gave up training for a career as a lawyer. At 33, Eddie committed suicide, leaving behind his wife and child. David eventually closed the restaurant and became an insurance consultant. After Eddie's death, it turned out that the boys had similar mental problems as children. They all banged their heads against the bed during emotional fits. It may have been hereditary, but nothing is known about the mental health of the boys' biological parents. The logical conclusion to this story would be David's words. They call us participants. We weren't participants. We were victims. Indeed, it's hard to imagine how such experiments could have been conducted.